Hello everyone, my name is Mr. Popo and we are Popo. This tutorial is going to be cut into two, an After Effects parts and a Blender parts. Let's start with After Effects first. So here is a look at two frames that we're going to be taking a look at on how to create it inside of After Effects. So we have this really beautiful hero shot, below view of this amazing object with these really incredible HUDs that we can talk about in a bit. And then we have this very Star Wars cinematic Paul Dyson kind of frames where the vehicle looks too big and we have all these HUDs and we feel like we're in a Death Stranding environment done by Hideo Kojima, not Konami. And so this, honestly, I don't think would have looked this great if it's not for the really amazing Toros Kose and Vectorcraft textures. And courtesy of him, I contacted him and they agreed to give me a sample which I can provide to you guys to follow up with this tutorial along with some render passes so that we all can learn together. So big shout outs to Vectorcraft and Toros Kose for the amazing work, for these super highly detailed textures. I think if it was not for them, I would have spent like at least a week or two to just get one texture done, but they have everything set up, Illustrator files I could just bring into Cinema 4D or Blender and just get going. So thanks once again for Vectorcraft. And by the way, this is not sponsored. All right, let's get into the tutorial. All right, for the sake of time, we're just gonna focus on this particular frame. So what you want to do, and before we actually start, let's take a look at what we need for this project file. So we would need the beauty, and the reason it's black, we will discuss it later. We will have the cell with the edges. We will have the cell only the contour without anything inside. We will have an environment HUD. There's blue. We have another environment HUD, but this time with a HUD overlay in it. We have this HUD blue environment. We have an orange HUD, some noise pattern mask, and of course, to finish it off, we have some tubes. So let's start with creating a new composition. So I'm going to click on creating new composition. I'm going to call this tutorial style frame. I'm going to make sure it's 1920 by 860. So those are the dimensions that I've used to render the passes. It doesn't matter what duration because we're just going to focus on the style frame. Now, first thing first, we're going to bring the beauty mask. So I'm just going to bring it here. The reason I don't see anything here, because this is an EXR file. An EXR file, take it simply, it's a file that has a lot of files in it. So basically it's like a zip file of so many things compressed in one. So you don't have to render a lot of things and see a lot of files. Cool. Now that we have everything here, can we see the details in it? Well, there is an effect for that and it's called Extractor. So I'm just going to click it and I still don't see anything. But the reason for this is that I need to go to layers and tell it exactly what kind of layer or render pass that I want to choose. Obviously here we're going to go for the combined. So the combined means that you will only be able to see the beauty mask, everything combined. If you take a look at some others, you will see some mask. We have some crypto materials. We have the glossiness. We have the shadows, obviously. So there is the volume. So there is a lot of things going on in this EXR. We'll just take the beauty mask first. All right. So that is creating it. Now that's created. Let's focus a bit on focusing. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna choose to create something we call Vignette. Make it comp size, 1920 by 860. Black is good, that's it. Now, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create a mask in the area where I want the viewer to focus on, because there is so much light and there is just enough attention a human being can have. So I'm just gonna help him focus on the part that I want him to focus. Obviously, when I created the mask, I only have this thing in the center, but that's not what I want. I want him to focus on whatever is here. So I'm going to go into mask, press M. Instead of add, I'm going to do subtract. So we're kind of there, but everything is blacked out and we have this weird mask. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into the mask and really feather it. All right. So that's taking us better. Now I'm just going to go and try to make this as subtle as possible. So as you can see here, with a slight solid, we're helping the user just focus on the bright areas. Cool. So that is about creating a vignette. Now, let's do a little bit of fixing here on the image, because as much as I try to make it perfect render from Blender and 3D application as a whole, there is a little bit of a value of colors that is not right. The values of colors are very different from each other here, as you can see. Not very, but there is a huge difference. So look at the blue here and look at the blue here in the ground. And look at the values of the entire ship compared to the ground and the light here. So obviously there is a bunch of color fixing that we need to do. And to do that, nothing better than creating an adjustment layer. So I'm going to put the adjustment layer under the vignette. And since we're not going to be touching the vignette anymore, and the vignette is always on top, it's good to just lock it up out of safety. And we can even lock this up as well. Cool. Now I'm gonna press enter and call this CC. All right. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna use an effect that I've discussed many times, and it's called lumetry. The reason I use this is because it has all the color correction tools that I need, but on top of all, it has them into just one effect, into just one section, so I don't have to call in a lot of effects. The first thing I'm gonna do is call in the creative here, and just like we saw last time, we're gonna call in for an LUT, a lookup table, a color correction preset. The one we're gonna use here is SL Clean Fuji HDR. All right, and then we're gonna go into 44. Perfect. So you can see the difference here. So all the colors now are balanced out between the shadows here and between the floor. We can also realize and notice that the floor color is exactly the same either on the left or on the right, in the top and on the bottom, and that's really crucial. Now let's just add one sharpen a little bit. Cool. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go to curve and just try to bring up a little bit, you know, a little bit the mood. So I don't want it to be completely dark. So I'm just going to add a little bit of brightness into the bright part. Great. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to call in for a little bit of sharpen because I feel like the image is slightly blurred. And that was a mistake that I've made when I was playing with the camera in the 3D software. So in sharpen, I'm going to go and add this to 40. And since you'll see my image is now sharp, and that's perfect. Basically, we're done with the color correction, but in terms of if you want some creativity and some areas of improvement, I would say probably you could add an add grain, go to final and maybe put like 0.25, you know, to get this grain, or maybe just goes to 0.1 to get a little bit of this beautiful film look grain. All right. Or another thing that you could do, you could call in for some quick chromatic aberrations. And instead of having the red and blue, you could actually go to some red and green, or green and blue, red and green, you see, so that it can match with the colors that you have here on the frame. And what you could do is call in for 98%, and then you'll see this. That's, you know, areas of improvement, but we're not going to use them for the sake of this tutorial. Now that we have our CC completely done, let's add in a little bit of focus, because as much as we use the vignette, we still have everything in focus. All right, so we can see the cable, we can see the end of the cable that I messed up when I was rendering. We can see the back of the ship, which is not really important here. There's a lot on focus, so let's help the vignette a bit. And what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna call it blur, and I'm gonna call in camera lens blur. Cool. And then with the help of camera lens blur, I just want to focus in the center. So I'm just gonna do something like this. All right, obviously I want to focus on the center, so again I'm gonna flip from add to subtract. And the problem here, as you can see, there is a huge sharp cut, so we don't want that. So what we're gonna do is feather that a bit. So we're gonna go into mask feather and then increase this a lot to 250 or something like this. Cool. So now by default your eye will always go into the center because it's brighter and it's popping off more. To help it go even more, I'm gonna add a radial. I'm gonna click my adjustment layer and add in a radial blur. Normally it gives you this funky look, but that's not the one that we're after. We're gonna go change it from spin to zoom. That's great, but what's the problem? It's too intense. So we're gonna bring it down a bit. So just say 2. All right, so you can see the difference here. Cool. I think the camera lens blur is still a lot, so just going into 1 would actually make it. We'll try to round all the pixels a bit, give it a funky aspect ratio, 3.3. We're going towards the bokeh. That's what we're trying to do here. Cool. You see here? So if you look at this is what we call bokeh. All right. So you just try to get that film look because that's what we're after here. Now we're done with the color correction. Now we can get into passes. Now the next thing we'll try to create is this highlights here. So for this, we're going to use this render pass called tubes. So I'm just going to bring it in, put it in. Obviously, it's going to take off everything. So let's just fix some things. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to add a tint. Now, the reason we're going to use this is just to take the white values and create a color out of them. So we're going to use this color here. All right. Now, the next thing, we want to get rid of all the black. That's great. It's too sharp for our image. So again, we're going to use some blur. I'm going to use some blur just a little bit. I think 3 would be great. Yeah, that's it. And we'll glow everything all together. Let's just say we'll increase the threshold, which is how far it glows, and then we'll just bring it down a notch. Cool. All right. So now that we have this, I'm just gonna put it to add so that we can bring it back to being overlaid on top. And obviously what I could do is I could just do like a 25 or 35 here, and that would work. All right, so now we'll try to add the HUD environment and HUD overlay before we start adding the real HUDs and trying to color correct this, just so we can have a real feel of what's going on. So we'll take the HUD overlay, which is this one. We'll bring it right on top. Oh, so I'll just lock these, and I'll put this into add, and I'll try to give this just a little bit of a push. So I'm gonna go into deep glow, and let's just see, just give it less extension, less threshold, and yeah, let's just keep it like that. Cool. And then we'll go into HUD environment, bring it on top, put it into add so that you can blend in with the environment and add the values together so it's brighter. Cool. And that's it. So now that we've introduced all these layers, we can see that we're starting to lose some details here on the top. So it's no longer in focus, and we start losing a bit of the beauty of this main object. So what we're going to do, we're going to try to emphasize the edges and the shape of the ship by adding all these futuristic HUDs. So what we're going to do, we're going to call in two of our friends, Cell and Cell No Edge. As you can see, it has all the edges, and that's exactly what we need to do. So let's start with Cell first. Now, if we bring in the Cell, all right, we're going to put it on top of 2. You'll see that we'll have all these details. So we have a lot of problems here. 1, the color of this. 2, it has this white thing. So it's not really beautiful. So let's focus on this first. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to invert it just so that I can have now this like this. And just by default, if you do this and you try to add it, you know, it's already fixing some stuff, but we can still make it better. So let's just focus on this for a bit. All right, so this is what we look at. Now I'm just gonna go for a tint, and we'll use this color like we used previously on the tubes. So we just want everything to go in harmony with each other. And then I'm just gonna give this a little bit of a push by adding a dip glow. All right, so adding a dip glow is great, but I think I'm just gonna increase the threshold a bit. Cool. And then reduce it exactly the same as we used for our tubes. Now the only problem here is that it's a little bit too apparent. But before we try to do anything with the opacity, because we can just go and do the opacity like this, you know, it's already fixing. But the problem here is that it's going to look like a toy. It's going to look like 3D. So it's not really going to feel like futuristic and HUD like, you know, it's not that UI feel. This feels more of a game, old style FUI. All right, so let's stylize this a bit. And that's where the noise comes in. So this noise was generated in the 3D application and rendered so that we can use the black spots, for example, to show it, or the white spot to show it. Cool. And so the way we do this, if we just solo this, the way we fix this is if we go to, for example, Illumina. So you can see right now, we only see it in these areas right here. Cool. And then all I have to do is turn down a bit the opacity. So let's just go to something like 2%. 2% is a little bit too low. Let's go to 10%. Cool, we're starting to see a bit. So we just go slightly 7%. Now, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to try to emphasize on these areas, like the edges on that area. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm just going to take both of these, Cell and Noise. We're going to duplicate them. And instead of using Cell, I'm just going to go into Cell No Edge, select this one, hold Alt on your keyboard and drag this to just replace. Cool. And of course, I'm going to add in again the opacity just so that I can see what I'm doing. So now you will see that you will be able to see the edges. All right. And I think instead of using add, I'm going to use screen just so that it's not that bright, so it's less brighter. And of course, we'll try to put this into an alpha matte instead. So I just want to see like the reverse, and we're just going to try to bring this into 20%. That's great. Cool. Now here, it's all good. But the problem is this part here is overloaded. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the cell edge and I'm just going to try to clean this up, this part specifically. And obviously I'll just go to the mask and subtract it so now we can see all this part, and just feather it just a little bit. Cool. Because we don't want to overload the picture on a certain area that we don't want the user to focus on. All right. Now, before we move into the next pass, there's a little bit of a thing that we forgot to do here. So as we see here, we're supposed to only have this on the part where the noise is applied. But as we can see here, it's not really doing that because we changed the track matte. And so what I'm going to do here for this kind of cases, how do you solve it, is you go and you take the black spot out, and that would fix it. All right, let's continue with adding a little bit more HUDs. So we're just going to go into this HUD blue, which is this one here. I'm just going to increase the intensity so that you can see it. Cool. It's the Death Stranding UI looking thing. And we're just going to bring it on top of our noise. Cool. Now I'll take this and I'll put it in add, and that's it, sitting nicely there. All right, for now we have everything well done, everything completed. composited, but you'll see a little bit of a problem here. We have too much blue, and there isn't really this complementary color going on to help it stand together as a whole picture. So we know that the complementary color for blue is orange, and that's exactly why here I used orange HUD instead. All right, complement everything, and so that the HUD can stand out. Because if we take the HUD and put it in blue, it's going to be no different from anything we've added, just like the HUD overlay. So that's why that HUD specifically is in orange, so that it can stand out and balance the entire image together. And it standing out will not be a burden on our eyes, like it's standing too much. No, it's perfect harmony with the blue color that is dominating the picture. So again, let's just bring it here. Let's put it. So we get this. We're going to create an ad, and what we're going to do, actually I want it to be right on top of all this. Cool. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little bit of a deep glow to help it out. I think the threshold is a little too low, so we're just going to help it up a bit, and the exposure needs to be a little bit up. Cool. Now let's make things a little bit better. And so what I want to do is I want this to stand on its own. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate the tube, and I'm going to put it somewhere here. All right, so it's basically exactly the same. So the only thing that I'm going to do now is I'm going to delete the Gaussian blur and delete the linear color key because I don't need them. And the only thing that I'm going to add is a directional blur, and I'm going to put it between the deep glow and the tint. The reason for this, it's because I want it to be affected. This blur that we're going to create, I want it to be affected by the deep glow as well. All right, instead of just completely killing and blurring the glow as well. And that would be against whatever I'm creating here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn this a little bit like this so that you can see. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to increase this into 180, for example, and then we're going to have this very horizontal blur, but that's not really what I want. So what I want to do, I want these lines to align with the view of the entire ship and scene, and that is -95 for my case. All right, so as you can see here, everything is horizontal and parallel to my eye view. Cool. One thing I could do, to be honest, is decrease a little bit this. Cool. So it doesn't really stand and disturb us. Now, everything is done, but there is a little bit of a problem. Because of all the highlights that we've added, we kind of are losing sight of the ship. So let's bring in the ship focus back again. So for that, we're gonna add in this guy. So let's bring in this guy and let's focus on this. So Extractor to bring in more things, and the one that I'm going to bring in here is the glossiness. All right, so if we go here to the glossiness, we'll be able to see the glossiness here. Now, one thing I want to do, of course, is I want to invert this a bit. All right. And then what I'm going to do, if we just use it like this and we just try to do an ad, nothing really is going to happen. All right. But if I go into soft light, you see some area started becoming bright because using this glossiness together with the maps. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the parts that I feel like are necessary to be seen. So I think it's somewhere around this. All right. So as you can see here, see there is a big difference. I think I'm going to bring it into overlay because it's a little bit too bright. Cool. All right. So that's perfect. All right. I think we can just turn this off. Yeah, that's still okay. Yeah. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn this into 78, something like that. Yeah. All right. But the one thing that we still need to fix is how sharp it is. So I'm just going to go into this and let's just say a little bit more, something like that. Cool. So you see before, after. So we just darken it slightly. Cool. And then I'm just going to take exactly the same and bring in the extractor, and I'm going to take in the mist and inverting it. And of course, I'm just going to go into a soft light. Great. And I think I'm just going to bring in this into 50%. Cool. Now that's fixed. All right. Just so that you can understand a little bit of a mist, we have this example here. So this is the mist. All right. So what you do basically is you just highlight the part. You use it as a soft light so that whatever it's dark is going to be darker. Whatever is bright is still going to be seen in the same value. So here, why it's not really having that much of an effect, it's because they're slightly all on the same level, but we still use it just so that we can bring up a little bit the values of the HUD, the orange and the blue. Cool. With that said, that's pretty much it. The one thing you could add is obviously some blurs. So let's look quickly on how to do that. There's some flares. So I'm just going to bring in the optical flare. I'm going to put it somewhere here. I'm going to use optical. I'm going to call it. All right. Obviously, we want this to be an ad. All right. So we can see it. Now, I don't want to use any of this. So I'm just going to clear it all. But what I want is just this. this. So I could choose between all this. So smudgy, Pasic, and I think the one that I went with is the specs. All right, so we have the specs or messy. So let's just take the messy here. And then if I just bring it somewhere here, that's great. And all I have to do right now is just go like 25. All right, so it's just gonna bring in a little bit of that grunge. But again, it's depending on what kind of direction that you want. But for the direction that I'm going here, I don't think it's really that important. I think it's speaking for itself. And that is the end of part 1. Part 2, we will discuss how to get this whole scene and how to prepare it and get the entire environment out, how to get the passes on. And if you have any questions about part 1 and anything that we've seen and something is not clear, you can just put them in the comment and I'll make sure I'll go one by one and answer each one of them. And of course, this goes without saying, big thanks one more time to Victor Craft and Taurus Kose for providing this amazing pack of textures. And if you like what you see, go ahead and buy yourself some really good texture packs, and also so that you can follow me on the next tutorial. My name is Mr. Popo and we are Popo. I'll catch you on the next one.